Welcome, everybody, to our May office hours. Okay, today's topics are missing therapy minutes, expired ETRs and waiving the ETR. And then we will open it up for any other questions or comments that anybody might have. So go ahead, Dee Dee, and go to the next slide. Okay, Dee Dee, did you want to take this?
Sure, and we'll just kind of jump in together. So Helen mentioned we literally had no questions until about 15 minutes ago. So one of the questions, and we've had this question before, if a therapist doesn't meet the therapy minutes within a month, do they have to make it up the following month or within a reasonable time frame? And does it make a difference if it is due to the student being out, or if it's a short month because of a break, or if there was, a school activity or something like that? And the answer is it does matter. And so I'm going to show you here on the next slide. I'm just making sure we've got a couple folks still popping in. So I want to make sure everybody's getting in that needs to. So if the child misses a therapy session because they're attending a school activity, or because the provider is not available, then yes, you have to make up those minutes. When services are designated as monthly on an IEP, and there's no weekly schedule, and if you have been to any training with Helen and I, you have heard us say over and over, do not simply put monthly minutes for related service providers. You need to parenthetically break out what that should typically look like in a week. But if you didn't do that, there is no prorating the percentages. So in this case, even if the child was absent, you still owe those minutes. So that's one of the reasons, in addition to the fact that it makes it clearer for the family, if you did not designate in parentheses what that would typically look like and the child's absent, you still owe those minutes to the student. Having said that, the rule is if the child is absent and it is not because of the district's fault, it's not, it's not a district reason, then you do not owe the child those minutes. However, if you had a student who was chronically absent, or in a case where a student perhaps had a very significant illness and they missed a lot of time, you don't owe those minutes, but what you do have to do is the team should at least meet and determine whether that has impacted the student and whether you need to provide some compensatory services to keep the child on track and making progress. So it isn't because the district did anything wrong, but you still need to do your due diligence to make sure the child is accessing FAPE. So you need to consider that. It may not have had an adverse effect, and maybe you don't need to provide anything, but you at least have to consider whether or not you do. So basically, again, the rule is if the student misses minutes because of an activity that the school is having, or because the therapist wasn't available, you owe those services. If the child misses because they're engaging in testing, you do not, because that's part of their IEP. So you do not owe minutes for that. But if it's because the school has chosen, whether it's a field trip, whatever, an assembly, whatever the case is, to not have the therapist available for the student, then you do owe those minutes. So hopefully that makes sense. Any questions about that?
I was just going to add a little caveat to that, possibly, depending upon the services. if it's a field trip and the therapist is going along to purposely work with that student, as far as being in the community where sometimes we're generalizing skills, then they wouldn't have to compensate for that. It wouldn't have to make that up.
Right, absolutely. And that's not the same thing at all because we consider that still providing minutes.
Exactly.
So yeah, Helen's absolutely right. And we did that. Helen and I both did when we were
Yes.
teaching. We took OTs and speech folks along with us for that very reason, so that they could provide very meaningful minutes in real life settings. So that's totally different. That's just, you're just not being in the therapy room or the classroom, you're doing it out in the community. So yeah, we don't consider that missing minutes at all. And it is also acceptable if a therapist delivers those minutes typically in a small group and goes
Right.
along on the field trip, can still be providing minutes to more than one student. Now, obviously, it's not going to be 10 students at one time,
Right.
but
right.
if there's a couple of students that therapist is supporting in a volunteer work setting or grocery shopping or whatever the case is that they're doing in the community, if it's leisure activity, whatever, yeah, that's absolutely fine. So thanks for mentioning that, Helen.
Dee Dee?
Yes.
Hi, it's Marcy. Good morning, everybody. I'm sorry, I just logged in, so I may have missed the beginning of this conversation. But did anyone mention that Bernadette Laughlin has sent an email out? I believe she's working on a guidance statement about monthly minutes.
Oh,
No, but the answers that we have are right from Bernadette, and we referenced and we've shared this before in previous.
Oh, I know you have. Yeah.
We have OSEP. We actually have guidance directly from OSEP in multiple years detailing this. So yeah, if someone needed documentation about it, we absolutely have that. We can go back to the OSEP guidance that was given. So
I totally agree with you too. And I totally agree with this. Parents need to know when children are being serviced. Just putting, 120 minutes a month is not really being transparent. But Bernadette did send out that email saying monthly minutes are now allowable. So I'll find it and send it to you. It's frustrating to us. It's frustrating to me. Just make up your mind one way or the other.
Yeah.
Well, monthly minutes have been allowable after we kind of went through some reviews, and it was, talked about. And like Dee Dee said, as long as you're breaking it out in parentheses, and so the parent actually knows how many minutes, per week, even though it's in a monthly thing. And I think the monthly had a lot to do with possibly Medicare or Medicaid, but. Yeah, that's kind of been that's been the thing for the last couple years.
Right. And to be clear, Marcy, we weren't saying you can't do monthly minutes. We've always said, yeah, you can, but it is in a district's best interest to make sure that you parenthetically break that out of what that would typically look like. Because as we said, and you can see on the slide, if you don't do that, even if it's because the child was absent, you're making those minutes up.
Got it. Thank you. I appreciate the clarification.
Thank you so much. Okay, so another question Helen and I just got this morning is if there are any rules or regulations or laws or guidance around waiving recently expired ETRs, and can they in fact be waived? And basically, the answer would be no. There's not regulation about this. Here's what we will say. You have all heard us talk about multiple times now the change that went into effect at the beginning of last year that requires that all expired ETRs are treated as an initial. I'm sure if you have spent any time with us, you know how we feel about that. We're not happy about it. We have brought up to the state all of the concerns and implications that can have, especially when you can't get a response from a parent And does that then mean that you can no longer serve the child? Because if it's an initial ETR, by default, it's an initial IEP, and without a signature, you can't serve the student. So are we kicking kids off of services? And we have asked that question multiple times. Our director and I actually met with the folks at OEC back in early fall to discuss this, and we have not gotten any response back yet. So Helen and I are just going on record and letting you know that we intend to meet with, we will be at OAPSA on Friday. And if you are attending OAPSA, you probably saw that our friends from OEC are going to be there all day. And so Helen and I are going to take that opportunity to bring this up again and say, you know, we've got to have guidance on this, because there are inherent problems with doing it this way. So because of the fact that all expired ETRs are treated as an initial, you could not waive them, because you can't waive an initial ETR or initial, evaluation. Obviously, you can only do that if you are planning to just do a record review. So because of this change, the answer would have to be no. So that led to sort of a follow-up question. If you get an out-of-state ETR that's not accepted by the district, and the district decides that, initial testing is appropriate, can the testing in the report be used? So in other words, to what extent is it to be considered an initial? So this person said, they're really trying to understand the intent of the purpose of making this change, that all expired ETRs are treated as an initial. So do you have to do all new cognitive and achievement testing, even if that testing was recently completed and reported in the out-of-state report? But you've decided to reject it because it's missing a planning document or something like that. And here's what we would say. If it's not expired and you're just rejecting it because there are missing components, or some components of the ETR are not up to the standards of Ohio, or there's not information that you need, and so you have opted to reject it, then sure, if there's relevant testing that's good, absolutely, you could still use that. It gets a little murkier if we're talking about one that's expired, because again, we have to default back to the new guidance that says it's an initial. Well, if it's an initial, then you wouldn't have any previous testing. Having said that, I'm going to just say, we have spoken to the monitors, who are the folks who determine what's compliant and not compliant if you are under review. They understand the inherent problems that this ruling on all expired ETRs are an initial. They understand the problems that creates. And what I can tell you is they want us to do what's right for kids. If you were under a review and you weren't getting a response from a parent, we feel very strongly that they would not tell you that you have to cut a kid from special ed services. They would probably say, let's not look at that record as part of this review. I'm choosing my words carefully, because obviously we can't give official guidance or anything like that. I'm just telling you what we think would happen. And we feel very strongly that they would probably just say, don't show us. Let's not look at that. I would say the same probably for this question. If you have testing that was very recently done and it's good and it's valid and it's viable, I don't know that they would have an issue with you using it. Almost like treating it as there was an outside evaluation done, even if it's an initial and a parent opts to have outside eval done or comes in with a medical report and there was some cognitive testing in that. Even if it's an initial that wasn't expired, you would still use that information. You could still have that be part of the report, and you would still consider all of that. So that's what we would say about that. And again, we know that, there are some inherent issues with this ruling. So we are doing our due diligence and we keep trying to follow up. And so we're going to follow up again, since we'll have folks sort of at our mercy, if you will. We're going to again talk about this and hopefully, get some resolution here pretty soon. So hopefully that helps answer that. Helen, anything you wanted to add there?
No, I think you said it all, that, this has been something we've been trying to get an answer from, and we don't want it to stop services for students. And sometimes, and I'm not saying all times, but a lot of times, these aren't the parents that are on top of things all the time. These are the parents or the students that maybe don't have parents that are as involved. And those are the kids that need us the most, in a sense. Yeah, Dee Dee and I have discussed this before, and we think, just making this a new, an initial is just, it just causes too many problems. We've had calls from this, and we just know from what we've seen in reviews in the past, before this was implemented, there would have been major problems. That's all I have to say, Dee Dee. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Helen. Okay, so as Helen mentioned at the top of the hour, we have not had a ton of questions, which is kind of unusual, but folks have been so entrenched in the indicators and, and the testing window is open and all of those kinds of things. So we've had a few, but they're things that we have talked about at length on our office hours in the past. So we didn't want to, put those in because they're things that if you join us even semi-regularly, you've probably heard numerous times. So with that, we are just going to open it up to you if there's anything that you'd like to ask, and probably get you out really early today.
Hi, Dee Dee and Helen, it's Liz Rabideau.
Hi, Liz.
How are you?
Hi, Liz, that is muted.
Yeah. I have a question. If we have a kiddo, and there's very few of these, that receives just PT, there's no other services being provided, it's just a kiddo that receives physical therapy, where do those services go in Section 7? Do they go under the specially designed instruction where typically the intervention specialist would go, or do they go under related services?
Nope.
No,
Sorry, Helen, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that the PT is providing the SDI. If she has an assistant coming, she go under support for school personnel, just like the IS and the parapro.
Okay, that's what we've done.
Okay.
We've been getting guidance different from that, from Neonet, telling us that we should put those services under related services, which we have never done. So I think I talked to Dee Dee about some other things, about some guidance about those initial ETRs that we got from Neonet. So I'm not sure if you guys have a relationship with them, but we were just getting some guidance from them to telling us to put that PT or those related services under that related service section, which we're not doing.
Yeah. And what we would say, Liz, is we do have a relationship with them. There are folks, sometimes that they may not have updated information from OEC. They're obviously not part of IDEA reviews and such. And so, that's not their fault. And
I get it.
You can always tell them to call us if they have a question.
Okay.
And they do. That has happened where they've called to get clarification. But you're absolutely right. If the only specially designed instruction is coming from a related service provider, just like Helen said, then
Yep.
that goes. And if a student had 3 related service providers and that's the only SDI, one of them goes under where the intervention specialist would be under specially designed instruction, and then the other 2 would go under related services.
Correct. And that's exactly how we do it.
And that's
Perfect.
exactly right.
Okay, perfect. Thank
Great.
you so much.
Dee Dee and Helen, it's Marcy again. Just to clarify, I'm sitting here thinking about, I'm going back to the transfer ETRs from out of state. It was it was my and I'm not talking about whether they're expired or not, but am I incorrect in thinking that every transfer, any ETR that comes from out of state needs to be redone and considered an Ohio initial?
No, it does not. So
It
it
does
will
not.
be an Ohio,
Okay.
and it will be an Ohio initial, but that does,
Oh,
you can accept that. And here's where people get confused. So I'll make sure I explain it correctly. So if a child transfers in from out of state and the ETR is not expired,
okay.
and your district finds it compliant and it meets Ohio requirements and you are all good with the ETR, through your accepting and adoption of it, it becomes the student's initial Ohio record.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
So, yeah, so when you transfer that in, you are then by default sort of creating an initial record in Ohio for that child. But you do not have to throw out the ETR and do everything all over again just because it came from out of state. It is your team's option to look at that ATR and make a determination on whether or not it meets requirements. And if it does, why would you put a kid through, testing and everything all over again if you didn't need to?
Absolutely. I agree with you. Whatever guidance I got had said exactly what I said. So, but in reality, as I look at out of state ETRs, are often not meeting Ohio requirements. So we end up doing them,
Yeah, and you're right.
So-
that does happen. But we have seen, yeah, we have seen them come in from other states that have very strict standards and they're good. So, and I honestly, we're not sure where that confusion came from, but we have had several districts be under that same assumption that, because it's coming from out of state, we automatically have to redo everything, even if it's a year old. And that's simply not true. So if it's expired, of course, that's a different story.
Sure.
But
I think, whoops. I'm sorry. I was just thinking, I think some of the confusion in the last year or so has come because of the state with the initial expired, even if you're in state.
right.
I think that really caused confusion with accepting out of state, even if they were not expired. But I do think the whole issue with this expired, even if it's in state of, oh my gosh, we're going to an initial. So that's just my thought on some of that confusion.
Yes.
Got it.
I agree, Helen. I think that's contributing to it too. But even before that change came, we had folks assuming that if it was from out of state, they couldn't take it.
Yeah.
And you definitely can. And you're right, Marcy. By and large, a lot of the time you end up redoing them anyway because they're not meeting Ohio standards, or they wouldn't be compliant. But sometimes they are. And if they are, then it's okay. You just adopt it and transfer it in, and now the student has an Ohio record.
Got it. Thank you, guys.
Sure.
Actually, it's Liz again. I have one more question that kind of bounces off of that. If we have a transfer IEP and we're taking that transfer IEP with we're amending it, when we push it in Dazzle, it doesn't keep it as a transfer IEP. It records it as a review IEP. Is that something we're doing? Do you know anything about that?
Right.
We're taking the IEP, like saying we're just we're amending it to change the location of service or something like that.
Right.
Does it make
So
sense?
it's because if you're trying to do the amendment at the same time that you transfer it. So to get around that, what you do is you transfer it in. So if it's out of state, of course, you're transferring it in, it becomes
Correct.
an initial. If you're transferring it from within Ohio, and then then you're and even if once you've transferred it in and it's an initial, it doesn't matter if it's in Ohio or out of Ohio, then when you go to do the amendment, it should show up as an AIEP, an amended IEP.
Okay.
But yeah, you need to make
two-step process.
Yeah, two-step process.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Thoughts?
I have a question. It's completely off topic, Sherry Peters. Do you know if there's any talk at the state about creating a test that's not the state test and not the alternate assessment test to support some of these kids who no longer qualify for the alternate assessment?
I'm going to tell you, no, as far as a test. We haven't had as many meetings as we have in the past, but the idea is trying to create more supports for students. But they're not in our state. There never has been a 2% test in our state. But back when in other states there was a 2%, and the idea was that 2% didn't make any difference. Now, I don't know who said that. I don't really know who set the 1%. I mean, the feds, but what came out that this is the 1%. But as far as a test, because that's been brought up a couple times at our low incidence meetings, because we do get phone calls and messages like, can't we have something that meets the kids where they are? As far as I would say, they will not be creating a test in Ohio. If they do, I'll be gone by then. And I don't mean that to be funny, but Dee, do you have anything you want to add to that? I just don't see it happening.
No,
Well, they're not having a 2% across this. They're not having another test like in other states either. I don't know all their ins and outs of their alternate assessment testing, but the feds blank statement, no 2% or alternate test to the alternate assessment.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And like Helen said, we've asked, and it's a hard no coming from the state. That will not happen. And Helen's right. All we can tell you is at this point in time, that is not even open for discussion. So no,
Okay.
If it happens, it'll be long after we're both retired.
I'm asking just because, obviously we've had a lot that no longer qualify, and it is impacting their emotional state on these test dates. Like it is to the point where their behavior is not typical behavior, and it's very disheartening.
Yeah, we understand, and we have also shared many of those same concerns. And we've put out which we will probably be putting in our newsletter here shortly. We have revamped our Canvas course for supporting diverse learners. O'Cali has worked with OEC to put out a website as well, that it's called Literacy for All, but it has a lot of resources intended for that very population that you're talking about, Sherry. Students who do not qualify for the alternate assessment or have come off of alternate assessment, but are lacking skills to be prepared for the regular state tests and those end of course exams and so forth. And so from the state's perspective is collectively in education, we've got to raise the level of support to prepare those students. And we know the reality is, especially for our older high school kids who have been on AA, as Helen has mentioned in the past, for their entire school career, now suddenly we're taken off. They're the ones who are the most negatively impacted by, the change these past couple of years. The hope is that as districts are more discerning about who they put on alternate assessment in earlier grades, we will do a better job of giving access to those students to the general curriculum, ensuring that they're making progress in the general curriculum and better preparing them for, the general assessment. But we're well aware that within the first couple of years of the decision-making tool and seeing our number of students on alternate assessment drop dramatically in Ohio, that some of those high school kids are the ones who have been the most negatively impacted, and we know that. Helen, anything else you wanted to share?
No, not at this point. No. But I do feel the frustration myself personally with the alternate assessment. We still have kids no matter what, high school or not. And we are trying to support kids to raise the bar, but we do have some kids that still fall through the cracks.
Right. And absolutely. And like we said, that's why there's more concentration around upping the level of support and the variety of supports and ensuring that kids are getting access at earlier grades to that general curriculum and general content to try to better prepare them. So yeah, we feel it too. And we understand what you're saying, Sherry, about the emotional impact that it has on students. And that's certainly not lost on us. And, the only thing we can say is to do what you can to try to mitigate that for students as much as possible. But we hear you. We know that it's, we know it's real. And we know that that's frustrating. Any other
Thanks.
questions?
If there aren't any other questions, are there any questions that maybe someone would feel better if the recording was off? Okay, my wait time's terrible. It used to be much better when I was in the classroom. But I guess if there aren't, wait a minute, did somebody say there was?
No, Helen, I was just going to say nothing's in the chat and
Okay.
not hearing from anybody. So I think with that, we'll give you guys back the gift of time and remind you that forum is coming up on the 16th, and we really hope to see all of you there. We are going to take a deep dive into the expansion of the developmental delay category and consider all of the ways that will impact your practices in a district and help make sure that everyone is kind of thinking about all of the different moving parts to that and things that you might want to change or adopt in your district. So if you aren't aware already, I will just say here that we invite you to bring along one school psychologist from your district. And we just ask that you make sure that person is registered separately from yourself to allow us to better plan for, the number of folks that we're going to have. But we hope to see you all at forum, and thanks for joining us all year in office hours. And, you know, we wish you a happy, relaxing summer. And Helen, I'll let you kind of close us out.
Okay, well, just to reiterate what Dee Dee said, yeah, hope to see you at Forum. And everybody, I'm sure, is looking forward to some relaxing time in the summer. Because once again, it's been a year. So just going to say goodbye and hopefully see you at Forum. And we will be doing office hours again next year, starting in September. So thank you.
Thank you, Dee Dee. Thank you, Helen.
Sure
Thank
thing.
you. Thank you.